So the first thing we're going to do is find our initial, first initial, last initial in a really cool font, a font that you like. I'm going to do my son's initial, which is D. And so I'm going to go to Google image search. I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to search for D in different fonts or fonts with a cool D or, something along those lines. I'm going to click on images and I'm going to scroll until I see something that I like. That's kind of cool. It's different. While we're looking at these, I do want to mention that there are some you probably want to stay away from because of the way that we're doing this project. So for instance, anything that's three-dimensional, like this type of font, would not be a good idea because the letter is going to become a negative space and it's going to be surrounded by Zentangles. So we want to stay away from things that are three-dimensional like that. I saw something that I liked up here, which is Chronic, Creative Fonts, Font Space. Okay, so I like this, but I don't know what the D looks like. So I want to see what the D looks like. And so when I click on it, I see that the school system has disabled me from looking at it. So I'm going to kill that tab and go back here and look up Chronic Font. Okay, now I can see all of the letters and it says DA font top. So I think I can open this site. So I'm going to open and see. Oh yeah, now I can see it better. Okay, I like this D. Definitely like this D. So I'm going to draw it on my paper and I'm going to center it and make it big. Okay, so I have drawn the letter D and I think I like it. I might need a little more work. I might want to straighten that out a little bit. But I looked at the computer and I drew the letter. It's one letter. It's in the middle of the paper, nice and big. Okay. So the next step is to flip the paper over and write the font. So font equals Chronic. That's the name of the font. Okay. All right. Now my next step is to divide the page into a string. So divide the page into a section. So there's several different strings in our packet, but there are also different strings online. So we can go online and look up, similar to what we did before, we can look up Zentangle strings. Okay, going back to my image search. And the idea here is not to get too fancy, it's just to find a way of dividing the page. I kind of like the idea of just doing a scribble. So I think I'm going to do that. All right, so back on my page, I'm going to use a pencil. I used a pencil to draw my letter, I'm using a pencil to do my string. And so I'm just going to scribble. I may make a couple of scribble lines. That way I know the page is good and divided. Okay. Now I can either choose to create a box around the letter, or I could let the Zentangles create their own border around the letter. So let's look at some of those examples. So in this one, there's a very clear and defined box. And in this one, there is, whoops, I knew that was going to do that to me. In this one, there is a border created out of the design. So they made flowers, filled them with Zentangles, and used that as the border. This has kind of a combination of both. So this one has a box around it, but again, it's kind of created by the strings in the Zentangle. This has a border around it created specifically by the Zentangles. This has a box, but then there's a line that leaves the box. That's kind of neat. This has a box, and it's clearly defined by different Zentangle patterns and strings. This might be our last slide. Oh, this is our last slide. Okay, so here we have lots of Zentangles that create a border. So you have all kinds of choices. I think I'm going to stick with letting my Zentangle create my box. But if you wanted to create a box, you certainly could. You could take a ruler and draw a box with a ruler. You could have part of the Zentangle making the border and then part of it as a box. There's numerous ways that you can do this. But from this point, you'll move to your markers, and this time you'll be using your fine tip as well as your ultra fine tip. We'll be starting with the ultra fine tip to make our Zentangles. The number one most important thing is that you never outline the letter. Never, ever, 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 ever outline the letter. We're going to erase that when our project is done. So for instance, I might want to put a Zentangle in here. So I go to my patterns. I'm just grabbing a page and I find a Zentangle that I like. And so let's say I like pegs. Okay. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to draw pegs, Zentangle, into this section. And it's going to fill this section. At no point will this go into my letter. It will border right up to my letter, but it won't go into my letter. Like so. And so that will fill the section. And at no point will it ever go into my letter. It's just going to butt up to my letter, but it's never going to go into my letter. So I'll go through and I'll fill each of these sections. I want to make sure that when I'm finding Zentangles, that I also find one or two or three or four that use pencil shading, such as paradox or netting. Anything with gray is pencil. So Neuron has gray. Nippa or Nipa has gray. Palrevo has gray. Okay, I can't pronounce these things, guys. But Phycops has gray. Pepper has gray. Anything that has gray has pencil. And so when your project is completed, this is one that I did before, you will have a letter with no outline whatsoever as far as marker goes. So if you see, the Zentangle makes the outline of the negative space. There's also pencil shading within it. And this is done very neatly. This is not a fast one-day deal. This is, you have 3 days to do this project. This is your first major grade, one of only 3, which means this is worth 20% of your final grade. So do take your time. It's worth the investment of time to get it right and to make a good piece of artwork. This is your first major grade, your first major piece of artwork.